The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Maria Santos pushed her worn backpack higher on her shoulder and walked through the heavy oak doors of Harvard University. Most students were heading out for dinner or evening activities, but for Maria, this was when her real day began. "Mia, grab the supply cart from the storage room," her father Eduardo called out in Spanish, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. At 52, Eduardo had been cleaning these same halls for 8 years, and his weathered hands showed every day of it. Maria nodded and headed toward the janitor's closet, her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floors. She had been coming here with her father every evening since she turned 16. While other kids her age were hanging out with friends or doing homework in their bedrooms, Maria spent her after-school hours helping her dad clean the classrooms and offices of one of the world's most famous universities. The extra money helped pay for groceries and kept the lights on in their small apartment across town. As Maria loaded cleaning supplies onto the cart, she could hear voices from the nearby lecture hall. Professor Williams was wrapping up his evening seminar on American literature. She paused, listening to his deep voice as he discussed the themes in a novel she had never read but suddenly wanted to. The protagonist's journey represents the universal struggle between dreams and reality, the professor explained to his students. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from the most unlikely places, Maria smiled to herself. If only he knew that the janitor's daughter was hanging on every word. She wheeled the cart down the corridor, past walls lined with portraits of famous Harvard graduates, presidents, Supreme Court justices, Nobel Prize winners. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her as she walked. These halls had seen brilliant minds for over 300 years, but none of them looked like Maria. None of them had started their Harvard experience by emptying trash cans and mopping floors. "Maria, you take the East Wing tonight," Eduardo said, handing her a ring of keys. "I'll handle the administrative offices. We should be done by 9. The East Wing housed the music department, and Maria's heart always beat a little faster when she worked there. As she unlocked the first classroom, she could hear faint piano music coming from somewhere down the hall. Someone was practicing in one of the soundproof rooms, but the melody still managed to seep through the thick walls. She had never taken a formal music lesson in her life, but something about piano music made her feel like she could breathe easier. When she was 8 years old, her grandmother had shown her a few simple songs on an old keyboard at church. Maria still remembered the way the keys felt under her small fingers and how proud her grandmother looked when she managed to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star without making a mistake. As Maria emptied wastebaskets and wiped down desks, she listened to the distant piano. The student was playing something beautiful and complicated, probably a piece by one of those famous composers whose names she couldn't pronounce. She found herself humming along, picking up the melody without even realizing it. Between the music building and the literature hall, Maria had developed quite an education just by listening. She knew about Shakespeare's sonnets from Professor Chun's drama class. She understood the basics of calculus from overhearing Dr. Rodriguez explain derivatives to struggling students, and she had learned to recognize different musical styles from the countless practice sessions that filled the evening air. "Excuse me, could you empty this, please?" Maria looked up to see a young woman about her own age holding out a small trash can. The girl had perfectly styled blonde hair and wore a Harvard sweatshirt that probably cost more than Maria's entire wardrobe. Her name tag read, "Rebecca, music theory student." "Of course," Maria replied quietly, taking the can. Rebecca barely looked at her before turning back to her conversation with 2 other students. "Did you hear about the showcase next month?" Rebecca was saying. "I'm thinking of performing that Chopin piece we learned last semester. My private instructor says I have a real gift for the romantic composers." "You're so lucky your parents could afford lessons since you were 5, one of the other students replied. "I only started seriously playing in high school." "Well, natural talent can only take you so far," Rebecca laughed. "Proper training is everything in classical music." Maria finished emptying the trash and moved on, but their words stayed with her, natural talent versus proper training. She wondered What category she would fall into, if she even fell into any category at all. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking if she would be home in time for dinner. Maria quickly typed back that she would grab something later, then put the phone away before anyone could see its cracked screen. She had dropped it 3 months ago and couldn't afford to get it fixed, but it still worked well enough for her to watch piano tutorial videos on YouTube. That was her secret. Classroom, watching people's hands move across keyboards on her tiny phone screen, then trying to copy the movements on the silent keyboard app she had downloaded. It wasn't the same as touching real keys, but it was something. Late at night, when her parents were asleep, she would put in her earbuds and practice finger positions on her desk, imagining the beautiful sounds she would make if she had access to a real piano. As she finished cleaning the last classroom in the East Wing, the piano music from the practice rooms had stopped. Students were heading home to their dorms, probably to grab dinner before settling in to study. Maria envied their freedom to focus only on learning, to spend their evenings reading books and practicing instruments, instead of emptying trash cans and scrubbing floors, but she also felt grateful. How many 17-year-olds got to listen to Harvard lectures every night? How many kids from her neighborhood ever stepped foot inside these historic buildings? She was invisible here, but she was present. She was learning, even if no one knew it. Ready to head home, Mia? Eduardo appeared beside her, pushing his own supply cart. Almost done, Papa, she replied, giving the last desk a final wipe. As they locked up the building and headed toward the parking lot, Maria could see warm lights glowing in dorm room windows across the campus. Somewhere behind those windows, students were probably practicing piano, writing essays, and discussing big ideas with their roommates. Maria climbed into her father's old Honda and buckled her seatbelt. Tomorrow she would be back, invisible again, listening and learning from the edges of someone else's world. But tonight she was going home with melodies in her head and dreams she couldn't quite name yet. 3 weeks had passed since Maria started working the East Wing, and she had developed a routine. First, she would clean the smaller practice rooms where students left behind sheet music and empty coffee cups. Then she would work her way toward the main concert hall, saving it for last because that's where the magic happened. Tonight felt different, though. As Maria pushed her cart down the familiar hallway, she noticed colorful flyers posted on every bulletin board. Her English had gotten much better from listening to lectures, so she could read most of the words clearly. Annual Harvard Music Department Student Showcase, open to all enrolled students, April 5th-10th. Sanders Theater, applications due March 20th. She stopped walking and stared at the poster. The photograph showed a beautiful concert hall filled with people in fancy clothes, all watching a young man play a grand piano on stage. Below the image, more text explained that any Harvard student could audition to perform in the showcase. Any enrolled student. Maria felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had felt it before when she watched other kids her age walk into the local high school while she headed to work. She felt it when she saw families at the grocery store buying things without checking prices first. It was the feeling of wanting something that seemed impossible to reach. Those flyers went up today, a voice said behind her. Maria turned to see Professor James Wellington walking toward her. She had seen him before during her cleaning rounds, a tall man with graying hair who always stayed late in his office. He taught advanced piano and music theory, and students often lined up outside his door seeking advice. "Oh, sorry, Professor, I was just ... Maria started to move away from the bulletin board. "No need to apologize," he said gently. "Are you interested in music?" Maria felt her cheeks grow warm. She was just the janitor's daughter. Why would a Harvard professor want to talk to her about music? I just like listening to the students practice," she said quietly. Professor Wellington smiled. "Music has a way of calling to certain people, doesn't it? I've been teaching here for 15 years, and I can always tell who has that special connection to it." Before Maria could respond, he headed toward his office, leaving her standing alone with the flyer. She read it 3 more times before continuing with her work, but the words kept repeating in her mind. Open to all enrolled students. Open to all enrolled students. An hour later, Maria found herself in the main concert hall with her mop and bucket. This was her favorite room in the entire university. The ceiling stretched high above her head, with beautiful carved details that caught the light from the chandeliers. Rows of red velvet seats faced a stage where a magnificent black grand piano sat waiting. She had always wanted to touch those keys, but the piano was usually locked and she didn't have access to it. Tonight, however, someone had forgotten to secure the keyboard cover. The keys gleamed under the stage lights like a perfect smile. Maria looked around the empty hall. Her father was working in a different building, and all the students had gone home hours ago. She had maybe 10 minutes before Eduardo would come looking for her. She climbed the steps to the stage, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Up close, the piano was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The wood was polished to a perfect shine, and when she lifted the bench slightly, it didn't even squeak. Maria sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. They felt smooth and cool, nothing like the plastic keys on her phone app. She pressed middle C, and the sound that came out was rich and warm, filling the entire hall with just one note. She couldn't help herself. All those nights of watching YouTube videos and practicing silent finger movements on her desk had prepared her for this moment. She began to play Für Elise by Beethoven, one of the first pieces she had learned by watching online tutorials. The melody flowed from her fingers more easily than she had expected. The real piano responded to every touch, creating sounds that were gentle when she pressed lightly and bold when she added more pressure. Maria had never experienced anything like it. This wasn't just playing music. This was having a conversation with the instrument. As she moved into the more complicated middle section of the piece, she forgot where she was. She forgot about the cleaning cart waiting at the back of the hall. She forgot about her father's warnings to stay invisible and not touch anything she wasn't supposed to clean. All that existed was the music flowing from her heart through her fingers to the keys. When she finished the last note, the sound hung in the air for a moment before fading into silence. Maria sat there, breathing hard, realizing what she had just done. "My goodness," a voice said from somewhere in the darkness. Maria jumped up from the bench, her heart nearly stopping. Professor Wellington stood in the doorway, carrying a stack of papers and staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Maria said quickly, stepping away from the piano. "I wasn't supposed to. I was just ... But when she looked up, Professor Wellington wasn't angry. He was walking slowly down the aisle toward the stage, his eyes wide with surprise. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Maria's mind raced. She couldn't tell him about the YouTube videos and the cracked phone. She couldn't explain how she had been secretly listening to his students practice for weeks. I have to go," she said instead. She jumped down from the stage and grabbed her cleaning supplies, practically running toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear Professor Wellington calling, "Wait, please, I just want to talk." But Maria didn't stop. She found her father in the administrative building and told him she had finished early. Eduardo looked at her flushed face and asked if she was feeling all right, but she just nodded and said she was tired. During the drive home, Maria stared out the window and tried to slow her racing thoughts. Professor Wellington had heard her play. A real Harvard music professor had listened to her music and seemed ... impressed? But what did it matter? She wasn't a student. She didn't belong in that concert hall. "Papa," she said quietly as they pulled into their apartment complex, "what would happen if you lost your job at Harvard?" Eduardo glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Why do you ask, Mia?" "Just wondering." Her father was quiet for a moment. "We would figure something out," he said. "Finally, we always do. But let's not worry about things that haven't happened yet." But Maria was worried. As she lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Professor Wellington's face when he heard her play. She had revealed herself, broken her own rule. About staying invisible. What if he told someone? What if this somehow got her father in trouble? Still, when she closed her eyes, she could still feel those piano keys under her fingers and hear the beautiful sounds they had made together. For 10 magical minutes, she had been exactly where she belonged. A week passed after Maria's encounter with Professor Wellington, and she tried her best to stay invisible again. Every time she saw him in the hallways, she would quickly duck into another room or pretend to be very busy with her cleaning supplies. But something had changed inside her. Now that she knew what a real piano felt like under her fingers, going back to her silent phone app felt like trying to satisfy hunger with pictures of food. It was Tuesday evening when Maria made her first real decision to break the rules. Eduardo was working on the opposite side of campus in the law building, which meant she had at least 2 hours before he would come looking for her. The music department practice rooms were supposed to be locked after 8 p.m., but Maria had noticed that sometimes students forgot to secure them properly when they left. She finished her assigned cleaning early, and then quietly made her way to the practice room hallway. Her hands were shaking as she tried the first door handle. Locked, the second one too. But the third door opened with a soft click. Inside was a small room with white walls, a single window, and an upright piano that had seen better days. Some of the keys had small chips, and one of the pedals squeaked when she pressed it, but to Maria it might as well have been a treasure chest full of gold. She sat down on the worn bench and placed her fingers on the keys. This time she wasn't in the grand concert hall where anyone could walk in. This was her secret space, at least for tonight. Maria started with simple scales, the way she had seen students do during her cleaning rounds. C major, G major. Her fingers weren't as smooth as the trained students, but she could feel herself getting better with each repetition. After warming up, she tried Fur Elise again, the piece that had gotten her into trouble last week, but something magical happened. Without the pressure of possibly being caught in the concert hall, Maria found herself hearing the music differently. She began to understand how the soft parts made the loud parts more exciting. She discovered that slowing down in certain places made the melody more beautiful. Time flew by faster than she expected. When Maria finally looked at her phone, an hour had passed. She quickly locked up the practice room and returned to her cleaning. Her heart still racing from the music. The next evening she tried a different room. This one had a slightly better piano and sheet music scattered on the music stand. Maria couldn't read music notation very well, but she had gotten good at figuring out patterns. She spent 20 minutes just trying to decode a piece called Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. By the end of the week, Maria had developed a system. She would finish her regular cleaning duties as quickly as possible, then spend an hour in whichever practice room she could access. She was teaching herself pieces she found and forgotten, sheet music or remembered from YouTube videos she watched at home. One evening, she discovered a piece called Clair de Lune by a composer named Debussy. The title was in French, but when she managed to play the opening notes, the music sounded like moonlight would sound if moonlight could sing. It was gentle and mysterious, completely different from the bold, dramatic pieces she usually heard students practicing. Maria was so focused on learning this new piece that she didn't hear footsteps in the hallway outside. She was deep into the dreamy middle section when the practice room door suddenly opened. "Excuse me, but this room is reserved for music students only." Maria's hands froze on the keys. Standing in the doorway was a girl about her own age with perfectly straight brown hair and an expensive-looking leather bag slung over her shoulder. She wore a navy blazer with the Harvard logo embroidered on the pocket, and her nails were painted a soft pink color that probably cost more than Maria's. "Family spent on groceries in a week?" I was just cleaning," Maria said quickly. Standing up from the piano bench, the girl looked around the room, which was obviously already clean, then back at Maria with raised eyebrows. "Cleaning the piano keys by playing them?" Maria felt her face grow hot. She had been caught, and there was no good explanation. "I'm sorry, I'll leave right now." But instead of calling security or demanding to know what Maria was doing there, the girl stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Wait," she said. "That was Clair de Lune, wasn't it?" Maria nodded, surprised that the conversation was continuing. "You were playing it pretty well for someone who's just cleaning," the girl said, and Maria couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic or genuine. I'm Claire, by the way. I'm a sophomore in the music program. Maria, she replied quietly. Claire walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench. Without any warm-up, she began playing the same piece Maria had been struggling with. But when Claire played it, the notes flowed like water. Her fingers moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of proper training. I've been playing piano since I was 4, Claire said as she finished the piece. Private lessons twice a week, plus theory classes and master classes. With visiting artists. My parents spent about $40,000 on my musical education before I even got to college. Maria didn't know what to say to that. $40,000 was more money than her family saw in 2 years. So I'm curious. Claire continued, studying Maria's face. Where exactly did you learn to play like that? Because you're not a student here, are you? Maria shook her head. I listen to music online and try to copy what I hear. Claire's expression changed from suspicion to something that looked almost like disbelief. You taught yourself. Claire de Lune from listening to recordings? It took me 3 weeks, Maria admitted. I still don't have all the fingering right. For a moment, Claire just stared at her. Then she played a short, complicated passage that sounded like water. Droplets falling on leaves. Can you play that back? Maria hesitated, then sat down next to Claire on the bench. She listened carefully to the melody in her memory and slowly picked out the notes. Her fingering was awkward and she missed a few notes, but she managed to capture the basic pattern. That's unbelievable, Claire said softly. Do you know what that was? That was from a Chopin nocturne that most students can't play until their 3rd year of college-level training. Maria felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. Is that good or bad? It's... Claire paused as if she was trying to figure out something complicated. It's remarkable, but also kind of unfair. Unfair? Claire gathered her sheet music and stood up. My parents have invested a fortune in my musical education, and I still have to practice for hours just to get pieces. Half as difficult as what you just played by ear. She headed toward the door, then stopped and looked back. You know, this room is supposed to be locked after 8 p.m., right? Maria's heart sank. Are you going to report me? Claire studied her for a long moment. I didn't see anything, she said finally, but be more careful. Not everyone would be as understanding as I am. After Claire left, Maria sat alone in the practice room, her mind spinning. She had been discovered, but somehow she was still here. More importantly, she had just learned that what felt natural to her was actually something special. Something that students with years of expensive training found difficult. As she locked up the room and headed back to find her father, Maria realized that her secret world had just gotten a little bigger. And a lot more complicated. Professor Wellington couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious pianist he had heard in the concert hall 2 weeks ago. Every evening he found himself walking through the music building, hoping to hear those haunting melodies again. He had asked other faculty members if any of their students had been practicing for Elise recently. But nobody could give him a satisfying answer. The girl had run away so quickly that night. But something about her playing had stayed with him. It wasn't just technically good, though it was impressive for someone who seemed to have no formal training. There was something deeper in her music, an emotional connection that many of his advanced students struggled to achieve even after years of study. Tonight, as Wellington worked late in his office grading papers, he heard it again. Piano music floating down the hallway from one of the practice rooms, but this time it wasn't for Elise. Someone was playing Debussy's Claire de Lune, and they were playing it with a sensitivity that made him stop writing mid-sentence. He set down his red pen and walked quietly toward the sound. The music was coming from practice room 7, and through the small window in the door, he could see a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, not the usual college attire he was. Used to seeing on his students, Wellington watched as her fingers moved across the keys. Her hand position wasn't perfect. No teacher had ever corrected her posture or shown her the proper way to curve her fingers, but somehow she was creating magic anyway. The way she shaped each phrase, the natural way she handled the softer Dynamics, the instinctive timing she brought to the rubato sections. These were things that couldn't be taught from a textbook when she finished the piece. Wellington knocked gently on the door. Maria looked up, startled, and her face immediately showed panic when she recognized him. Professor Wellington. I'm sorry, I was just... Please don't apologize, he said, stepping into the room. That was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I shouldn't be here, Maria said, standing up quickly from the piano bench. The practice rooms are for students only, and I'm not... Sit. Back down, Wellington said gently. I'd like to hear you play something else. Maria hesitated, looking toward the door like she was planning to run again. I'm not going to get you in trouble, Wellington assured her. I'm just a teacher who loves music, and you clearly have a gift that deserves to be heard. Please. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Maria slowly sat back down at the piano. What would you like me to play? Whatever you. No, he said, pulling up a chair to sit beside the piano. Whatever speaks to you. Maria thought for a moment, then began playing a piece Wellington recognized as Mozart's Sonata No. 16, but she was playing it from memory, without any sheet music, and her interpretation was completely her own, where most students played it. With precise, mechanical accuracy, Maria brought a playful quality to the fast sections and genuine tenderness to the slower moments. Where did you learn this? Wellington asked when she finished. YouTube, Maria said quietly. And by listening to students practice when I'm working here. Working here? Maria's cheeks turned red. My father is a janitor. I help him clean the buildings in the evenings. Wellington felt something click into place. You're Eduardo's daughter? Eduardo Santos, who works in maintenance? Maria nodded, looking embarrassed. Your father is a wonderful man, Wellington said warmly. He always asks about my students when he sees me working late. He told me once that his daughter was very smart and loved to learn. He talks about me? Maria asked, surprised. All the time. He's very proud of you. Wellington leaned forward in his chair. Maria, what you just played, do you understand how remarkable it is? Most of my students couldn't interpret Mozart with that kind of musical intelligence, even with years of formal training. Maria shook her head. I just play what sounds right. To me, that's exactly what makes it so special, Wellington said. You have something that can't be taught, natural musical instinct. But you also have something that could be developed much further with proper guidance. They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that they had reached an important crossroads. Professor Wellington, Maria said finally, I know I shouldn't be using these practice rooms. If this gets my father in trouble, It won't, Wellington said firmly. In fact, I have a proposal for you. What if I taught you, properly, music theory, technique, repertoire, everything my regular students learn? Maria stared at him. But I can't afford lessons. I'm not even a student here. Wellington smiled. I've been teaching for 23 years, Maria. I didn't get into this profession for the money. I got into it because I believe music has the power to change lives. And sometimes a teacher meets a student who reminds them why they fell in love with music in the first place. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the campus lights. Can I tell you something? When I was your age, I was cleaning offices too. My mother worked as a night custodian in downtown Philadelphia, and I used to help her during summer breaks. One evening, I heard someone practicing violin in the building where we worked. I started hanging around, listening, trying to learn. Maria's eyes widened. Really? Really? A kind teacher at the community college eventually noticed me and offered to give me free lessons in exchange for help organizing her music library. That teacher changed my life. Wellington turned back to face Maria. I'd like to pay that kindness forward if you'll let me. But when would we meet? And where? I can't afford to register for official classes. Right here, Wellington said, gesturing around the practice room. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, after your father finishes his work, we'll call it independent study. No one needs to know except us. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. You would really do that? For me? Maria, in 23 years of teaching, I've had exactly 3 students who possessed what you have, that natural connection to music that goes beyond technique. One of them is now performing with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Another teaches at Juilliard. The third decided to become a doctor instead, but she still plays beautiful for her family. He sat back down at the piano and played a short complex passage. This is from a Rachmaninoff prelude. It's considered quite difficult, but I have a feeling that, with the right guidance, you could be playing pieces like this within a year. The music sounded like everything Maria had ever dreamed of being able to create: powerful, emotional, technically brilliant. What do you say? Wellington asked. Are you ready to really learn what you're capable of? Maria looked at the piano keys, then back at this professor who was offering her a chance she had never imagined possible. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'm ready. Excellent. We'll start next Tuesday. And Maria, bring a notebook. We have a lot of work to do. As Wellington gathered his papers and prepared to leave, Maria sat at the piano feeling like her entire world had just shifted. An hour ago, she was a janitor's daughter stealing moments with music. Now she was going to be the student of one of Harvard's most respected music professors. Professor Wellington? She called as he reached the door. Yes? Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't even know was there. Wellington smiled. My dear, I didn't put anything there. I'm just going to help you discover what was always inside you. 3 weeks into her secret lessons with Professor Wellington, Maria felt like she was living in 2 different worlds. During the day, she was still the invisible janitor's daughter, but Tuesday and Thursday evenings had become something magical. Wellington was teaching her things she never knew existed: how to read complex musical notation, the mathematics behind chord progressions, and the stories behind the great composers. Tonight was Thursday, and Maria was already 15 minutes into her lesson when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside practice room 7. She and Wellington both froze. It was almost 9 p.m., and the music building should have been empty except for the maintenance staff. Keep playing, Wellington whispered. If someone asks, you're helping me organize sheet music. Maria nodded and continued working through a batch invention, but her concentration was broken. The footsteps had stopped right outside their door. Claire Harrison stood in the hallway, staring through the small window of practice room 7. She had come back to retrieve sheet music she had forgotten earlier, but what she saw inside made her forget why she was there. The janitor's daughter, Maria, was sitting at the piano with Professor Wellington beside her, clearly receiving a private lesson. Claire watched as Wellington guided Maria's hand position, showing her a more efficient fingering for a difficult passage. She listened as he explained musical phrasing in the same patient, detailed way he taught his advanced students. What shocked her most was seeing Maria play through what looked like an intermediate-level batch piece with the kind of focus and understanding that Claire still struggled with after years of training. A hot feeling spread through Claire's chest. She had been trying to get private lessons with Professor Wellington for 2 semesters, but he always told her his schedule was full. She had been on a waiting list to study with him since freshman year. Yet here he was, teaching someone who wasn't even a student at Harvard. Claire pulled out her phone and took a quick photo through the window, then hurried away before either of them could notice her. The next morning, Claire couldn't concentrate during her music history lecture. Professor Martinez was discussing the social barriers that prevented working-class people from accessing classical music education in the 19th century, and every word felt like a personal insult. Here she was, paying over $50,000 a year for her education, struggling to master pieces that this janitor's daughter seemed to learn effortlessly. After class, Claire found herself at her usual study table in the campus cafe, but instead of opening her textbooks, she stared at the photo on her phone. Wellington was leaning forward, completely engaged in teaching Maria something about hand position. The expression on his face was one Claire had never seen, directed at her genuine excitement about a student's potential. You look like someone stole your coffee, said Danny, one of her classmates, as he sat down across from her. Something like that, Claire muttered, putting her phone away. Rough morning? You seem distracted in Martinez's class. Claire looked up at Danny. He was a senior, someone who had been around the music department long enough to know all the gossip. More importantly, he was planning to apply for the showcase performance next month. "Danny, what do you know about Professor Wellington's private students?" "Wellington? He barely takes private students anymore. Why?" "Just curious. I heard he was working with someone unusual." Danny raised an eyebrow. "Define unusual." Claire hesitated. If she said too much, it might get back to Wellington before she was ready. "Never mind, it's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. For the rest of the week, Claire found herself walking past practice room 7 on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Each time she saw the same thing, Wellington patiently teaching Maria pieces that were getting progressively more difficult. By the end of the week, Maria was working on a Chopin waltz that Claire herself had struggled with for months. The breaking point came the following Tuesday. Claire had spent 3 hours practicing for her upcoming jury exam, and she was frustrated with her progress on a particularly difficult Beethoven sonata. Her technique was solid, but something was missing. The music sounded correct, but not alive. As she left the practice building, she heard someone playing the same Beethoven sonata from practice room 7, but this version was different. It had energy, emotion, the kind of natural musicality that Claire had been trying to capture all semester. She looked through the window and saw Maria at the piano, with Wellington nodding approvingly as she played through the difficult final movement. When Maria finished, Wellington actually applauded. "Excellent, Maria. You're beginning to understand how Beethoven builds tension through rhythm. Next week, we'll work on the Rachmaninoff." "Rachmaninoff?" Maria asked, her eyes lighting up. "You're ready for it?" "I think you'll connect with his emotional style." Claire felt something snap inside her. Rachmaninoff was advanced repertoire, the kind of music that separated serious pianists from casual players. She had been begging Wellington to teach her a Rachmaninoff piece, but he always said she needed more technical development first. The next day, Claire found herself surrounded by her usual group of friends in the student center. Rebecca was complaining about her music theory homework, while Trevor talked about his plans for spring break. Their conversation felt meaningless compared to the music she had heard coming from practice room 7. "You've been weird lately," Rebecca said, looking at Claire with concern. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," Claire replied, but she wasn't fine. She felt like everything she had worked for was being undermined by someone who had no right to be in their world. "Have you decided what you're playing for the showcase auditions?" Trevor asked. "I'm doing that Mozart concerto we worked on last semester." "I'm not sure yet," Claire said. But as she spoke, an idea began forming in her mind. A dangerous, reckless idea that she knew she would probably regret. That evening, there was an informal gathering in the music department lounge. About 20 students had shown up to discuss the upcoming showcase auditions and share their performance plans. Claire listened as her classmates talked about their piece choices and preparation strategies, but her mind was elsewhere. "What about you, Claire?" asked Rebecca. "Any thoughts on what you might perform?" This was her moment. Claire stood up, making sure she had everyone's attention. "Actually, I have something interesting to share with all of you." The room quieted down, and Claire felt her heart start beating faster. Once she said what she was planning to say, there would be no taking it back. "How many of you think that classical piano performance requires years of formal training and expensive education?" Several students nodded, looking confused about where this was going. "Well, I've discovered that someone thinks they can master our repertoire without any of that. Someone who believes they can just walk into our world and play at our level." "What are you talking about?" Trevor asked. Claire pulled out her phone and showed them the photo she had taken of Maria with Professor Wellington. "This is the janitor's daughter, getting private lessons from Professor Wellington. She thinks she can play classical music as well as any of us." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Rebecca leaned forward to look at the photo more closely. "Is this real?" someone asked from the back of the room. "Very real," Claire said. "I've heard her play. She's adequate. But here's what I think would be interesting, a little demonstration of what real training can accomplish versus just natural talent." The room was completely silent now, everyone waiting to see where this was heading. "I challenge her to perform," Claire announced. "Tomorrow evening, right here in the department lounge. Let's see if someone without proper education can really compete with students who have dedicated their lives to this art form." "That's kind of harsh, don't you think?" said a quiet voice from the corner. "Is it harsh or is it honest?" Claire shot back, "We all work incredibly hard to be here. We've all made sacrifices. If someone thinks they can achieve the same level without putting in the same effort, shouldn't we find out if that's true?" Trevor was looking at Claire with an expression she couldn't quite read. "And you think she actually agreed to this?" Claire smiled, feeling more confident now that she had committed to this path. "Oh, I think she will. Because if she doesn't, everyone will know that all her secret practice sessions were just pretending." As the gathering broke up and students headed back to their dorms, Claire felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had just set something in motion that she couldn't control. Tomorrow, she would find out if her years of expensive training really meant anything, or if natural talent could truly overcome everything she had worked for. Maria was cleaning the second-floor chemistry lab when Rebecca found her. It was Thursday evening, almost a week since Claire had issued her challenge, and Maria had been hoping that maybe everyone would forget about it. But the way Rebecca was, walking toward her with quick, nervous steps, told Maria that wasn't going to happen. "Are you Maria?" Rebecca asked, even though they had never been formally introduced. Maria nodded, still holding her cleaning cloth. She recognized Rebecca from the music department, one of Claire's friends who always seemed to have perfectly coordinated outfits and never appeared to worry about money. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca said, looking around to make sure. They were alone. "About tomorrow night." Maria's stomach dropped. "Tomorrow night?" Claire's challenge. "The performance in the department lounge. She's been telling everyone about it." Rebecca paused, studying Maria's confused expression. "Wait. You don't know, do you?" "Know what?" Rebecca's face turned red. "Oh, no, I assumed someone had told you. Claire challenged you to perform tomorrow evening. She told all the music students that you think you can play as well as trained musicians, and she wants you to prove it." Maria felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "She wants me to perform? In front of students? In front of everyone?" "The whole music department. She's been spreading the word all week." Rebecca looked genuinely sorry. "Look, I don't know you very well, but Claire can be intense when she feels threatened. I wanted to warn you because this feels wrong to me." After Rebecca left, Maria stood alone in the empty chemistry lab, her hands shaking. She had never performed for anyone except Professor Wellington. The thought of sitting at a piano in front of dozens of music students who had years of formal training and expensive educations, made her feel sick. She found Eduardo in the library, carefully dusting the rare books section. When she told him what had happened, her father set down his cleaning supplies and looked at her with concern. "Mia, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do," he said gently. "These students, they don't understand our world. You have nothing to prove to them." "But Papa, what if she's right? What if I've been fooling myself this whole time? What if all my practice doesn't mean anything because I didn't learn it the right way?" Eduardo sat down on one of the library chairs and gestured for Maria to sit beside him. "Let me tell you something I never told you before. When I was 22, I wanted to be an engineer. I had been working construction during the day and taking night classes at the community college." Maria looked at her father in surprise. She had never heard this story. "One day, my supervisor at the construction site found out about my classes. He laughed and told all the other workers that I thought I was too good for manual labor. He said I should prove I was smart enough for engineering by solving a complicated building problem in front of everyone." "What did you do?" "I was scared, Mia. So scared, but I did it anyway. I solved his problem, showed him calculations. He didn't even understand. And you know what happened?" Maria shook her head. "Some of the workers were impressed. Some were angry. Some didn't care at all. But the most important thing was that I proved something to myself. I learned that I was capable of more than I thought, but you didn't become an engineer. Eduardo smiled sadly. No, life took me in a different direction. Your mother got pregnant with you, and I needed steady work with health insurance. But those night classes weren't wasted, Maria. They taught me that I was smart enough to dream bigger dreams. And now, I get to watch my daughter live out dreams I couldn't pursue. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. I'm so scared. Papa, what if I mess up? What if they all laugh at me? Then they laugh, Eduardo said simply. But if you don't try, you'll never know what you're truly capable of. And Mia, I've heard you practice. You have something special. Don't let other people's fear make you doubt yourself. An hour later, Maria found Professor Wellington in his office, grading papers with classical music playing softly in the background. When she told him about Claire's challenge, his expression grew serious. I'm sorry this happened, he said. Claire is a talented student, but she's also dealing with her own insecurities. This challenge isn't really about you. It's about her fear that talent might matter more than privilege. Should I do it? Maria asked. Wellington was quiet for a long moment. That depends. Are you doing it to prove something to them, or to prove something to yourself? I don't know anymore. Maria, in my 23 years of teaching, I've learned that the most important performances aren't the ones where everything goes perfectly. They're the ones where you discover something new about yourself. He turned in his chair to face her fully. If you decide to accept this challenge, what piece would you want to perform? Maria had been thinking about this since Rebecca left. The Rachmaninoff piece you showed me last week. A prelude in C-sharp minor. Wellington raised his eyebrows. That's ambitious. It's technically demanding and emotionally complex. Are you sure? It's the most beautiful piece I've ever heard. And when you played those first few notes for me, I felt like it was telling my story. The dark beginning, the struggle in the middle, and then that moment when everything becomes powerful and bright. The piece does have that journey, Wellington agreed. It moves from despair to triumph. Rachmaninoff wrote it when he was about your age, dealing with his own doubts about whether he belonged in the world of serious music. Really? Really. He came from a family that had lost their money, and he felt like an outsider among the wealthy music students in Moscow. This piece was his way of proving that raw emotion and talent could compete with formal breeding and connections. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. It's perfect then. It would be perfect if you're ready for it. But Maria, this piece requires more than technical skill. It requires you to be completely honest about who you are and what you've been through. Can you do that in front of a room full of students who might not understand your story? Maria thought about her father's words, about his courage to solve that engineering problem even when he was scared. She thought about all the evenings she had spent listening to music through practice room walls, dreaming of someday being able to create those same beautiful sounds. Yes, she said quietly, I think I can. Wellington smiled. Then let's spend the next hour making sure you're as prepared as possible. But Maria, remember, no matter what happens tomorrow night, you've already accomplished something remarkable. You've taken a gift and developed it through pure determination. That's something no amount of money can buy. As they walked to practice room 7 for an emergency lesson, Maria felt her fear transforming into something else. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. Tomorrow night, she wouldn't just be playing piano for a group of students. She would be representing everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been underestimated because of where they came from. The Rachmaninoff prelude was going to tell her story, and she was finally ready for people to hear it. By the time Maria went home that night, word had spread throughout the entire music department. Students were texting their friends, professors were discussing it in the faculty lounge, and even students from other departments had heard about the unusual challenge scheduled for Friday evening. Tomorrow night, the department lounge was going to be packed. Friday evening arrived faster than Maria had hoped. She spent the day trying to focus on her regular work schedule, but her hands kept shaking every time she thought about what was waiting for her that night. Even Eduardo noticed her nervousness. During their usual afternoon lunch break, "Remember what I told you, Mia?" he said quietly as they shared a sandwich in the campus courtyard. You belong wherever your talent takes you. At 7 p.m., Maria walked into the music building wearing her best outfit, a simple black dress that her mother had bought for her high school graduation. She could hear voices and laughter coming from the department lounge, more noise than she had ever heard from that room before. Professor Wellington was waiting for her in the hallway. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I might throw up, Maria admitted. That's normal. Even professional concert pianists feel nervous before important performances. The key is to use that nervous energy to fuel your playing. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Remember, you're not just playing for them tonight. You're playing for everyone who believes in you, including yourself. When they walked into the lounge, Maria's heart nearly stopped. The room was packed with people. She had expected maybe 20 or 30 music students, but there had to be at least 60 people crowded into the space. Students sat on chairs, leaned against walls, and even sat cross-legged on the floor. She recognized most of the music faculty, including Dr. Martinez from music history and Professor Chun from the drama department. At the center of the room sat a beautiful upright piano that someone had wheeled in specially for tonight. Maria had never seen it before. It looked like one of the nicer instruments from the practice rooms. As soon as people noticed Maria enter, the room began to quiet down. She could feel dozens of pairs of eyes following her movement, and she heard whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. That's her, someone said. She looks so young, another voice whispered. I heard she learned everything from YouTube. Claire stood near the piano, wearing an expensive-looking blue dress and a confident smile. Everyone, this is Maria, she announced loudly. She's going to show us what natural talent can accomplish without formal training. The way Claire said it made it sound like a joke, and several people in the room chuckled. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to keep walking toward the piano. What piece will you be performing? Asked Professor Chun, who was sitting in the front row. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, Maria said quietly. The room got even quieter. Several students exchanged glances, and Maria heard someone whisper, That's a really difficult piece. Rebecca, who was sitting near the back, gave Maria an encouraging nod. Professor Wellington found a seat where Maria could see him and gave her a subtle thumbs up. Claire's confident expression faltered slightly. Interesting choice, she said. That's graduate-level repertoire. Maria walked to the piano bench and sat down, adjusting her position the way Professor Wellington had taught her. The keys looked enormous under the bright lights someone had set up. Her hands felt cold and stiff. She placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the back, someone coughed, and it sounded as loud as thunder. Then Maria played the first chord. The Rachmaninoff Prelude begins with 3 simple, haunting notes that sound like a church bell tolling. But when Maria played them, something magical happened. The notes filled the room with such clear, pure sound that every conversation stopped immediately. She continued with the dark, mysterious opening section. Her fingers moved across the keys with the confidence that comes from hours of practice, but more importantly, with the emotional understanding that comes from living through your own struggles. This wasn't just technique, this was storytelling. The piece moved into its more complex middle section, where Rachmaninoff had written cascading runs of notes that sound like water falling over rocks. Maria's hands danced across the keyboard, and she could feel herself disappearing into the music. The room full of people faded away. The pressure and judgment faded away. There was only the piano and the story she was telling. She could sense the audience's mood changing. The whispers had stopped completely. Even the people who had come expecting to be entertained by a failure were now leaning forward in their seats, captured by what they were hearing. Claire, standing beside the piano, had a clear view of Maria's face and hands. She watched in growing disbelief as Maria navigated through passages that Claire herself had struggled with for months. But it wasn't just that Maria was playing the notes correctly. She was making them sing with an emotional depth that Claire had never achieved, even with her years of expensive lessons. The piece reached its dramatic climax, where Rachmaninoff had written powerful, thunderous chords that demand both technical skill and fearless emotional commitment. Maria attacked these sections with a passion that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Her entire body moved with the music, and sweat beaded on her forehead from the physical effort. Professor Wellington sat in his chair feeling amazed and proud. He had taught this piece to dozens of students over the years, but he had never heard it played with such raw honesty. Maria wasn't just demonstrating her technical ability, she was sharing her entire life story through Rachmaninoff's notes. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, building to the famous ending where the dark beginning transforms into triumphant, ringing chords, Maria felt something she had never experienced before. She felt powerful. She felt like she belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing. The final chords rang out through the room like victory bells. Maria held the last chord until the sound completely faded into silence, then slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The room stayed quiet for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Within moments, the entire room erupted in applause that was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. Maria looked up, blinking as if she was waking up from a dream. Students were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Professor Chun was nodding with obvious approval. Even some people who had clearly come expecting a spectacle were applauding with genuine appreciation, but the person whose reaction surprised Maria most was Claire. Instead of looking angry or defeated, Claire looked stunned, as if she had just witnessed something that changed her understanding of what music could be. "That was incredible," Rebecca called out over the applause. "Absolutely incredible." Professor Wellington stood up and walked toward the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily over the noise, "what you just heard is exactly why I became a music teacher. This is why music matters. This is what happens when pure talent meets genuine passion and hard work." The applause continued for almost a full minute. When it finally died down, people began approaching Maria to congratulate her. Students who had never spoken to her before were introducing themselves and asking questions about her musical background. Claire walked up to the piano, looking somewhat shaken. "Maria," she said quietly, so only Maria could hear, "I owe you an apology. I challenged you for all the wrong reasons, and you just taught me something important about what music really means." As the crowd began to thin out and people started heading back to their dorms, Maria sat at the piano bench feeling like her entire world had shifted. An hour ago, she had been the invisible janitor's daughter. Now she was a musician who had proven herself in front of Harvard's entire music community. Professor Wellington approached her as she was gathering her things. "How do you feel?" he asked. Maria thought for a moment. "Different," she said finally. "Like I just found out who I really am." "That's exactly what happened tonight," Wellington said with a smile. "Welcome to your new life, Maria." The weekend after Maria's performance felt like living in a completely different world. On Saturday morning, her phone, the same cracked phone she had used to watch YouTube piano tutorials, wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from people she had never expected to hear from. Rebecca had texted her at 7 a.m. "I keep thinking about your performance. Would you want to grab coffee and talk about music?" Trevor, who had barely acknowledged her existence before Friday night, sent a message asking if she wanted to practice together sometime. Even more surprising was the email waiting in her inbox. From Dr. Martinez. "Dear Maria, I was deeply moved by your performance Friday evening. I would like to discuss some opportunities with you. Could we meet Monday afternoon?" But the most important conversation happened Sunday evening when Maria's entire family gathered in their small living room to hear about what had happened at Harvard. Her mother, Carmen, had taken an extra shift at the diner where she worked, so this was the first chance they'd had to sit down together. "Tell us everything, Mia," Carmen said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of coffee. Maria described the packed room, the nervous moments before she started playing, and the incredible feeling of losing herself in the music. But as she talked, she noticed her father Eduardo sitting quietly, a strange expression on his face. "Papa, what's wrong?" she asked. Eduardo looked up with tears in his eyes. "Nothing's wrong, Maria. I'm just proud and a little amazed." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Yesterday, my supervisor called me into his office. I thought maybe I was in trouble, but instead, he told me that several professors had mentioned what a wonderful daughter I have. They said the university is lucky to have our family as part of their community." "What does that mean?" Carmen asked. "It means they're promoting me to head of evening maintenance for the academic buildings. Better pay, better benefits, and more respect." Eduardo's voice grew stronger. "For 18 years, I've been invisible in these buildings. But now, suddenly, people see me as the father of the talented young woman who played Rachmaninoff." Maria felt a complex mix of emotions. She was happy for her father, but also worried. "I don't want you to be valued just because of what I did." "Mia, that's not how it works," Eduardo said gently. "I've always been good at my job. I've always been reliable and hardworking. But sometimes it takes something special to make people notice what was already there. Your courage helped them see our family differently, and that opened doors that were always supposed to be open." Monday afternoon, Maria sat across from Dr. Martinez in her office, surrounded by books about music history and photographs of famous composers. The professor had kind eyes and spoke with a slight accent that reminded Maria of her grandmother. "Maria, I've been teaching here for 12 years. And I've never seen a performance that affected people the way yours did Friday night," Dr. Martinez began. "I've spent the weekend making some phone calls, and I have a proposition for you." Maria felt her heart start beating faster. "Harvard has a special scholarship program for exceptional students from underrepresented backgrounds. It's designed for people exactly like you, those with extraordinary talent who haven't had traditional educational opportunities. I'd like to help you apply." "But I haven't finished high school yet," Maria said quietly. "That can be arranged. There are accelerated programs, equivalency tests, and bridge programs designed to help students transition into university-level work. With Professor Wellington's continued mentorship and some additional support, I believe you could be ready to apply for fall admission." Maria stared at Dr. Martinez, unable to process what she was hearing. "You're saying I could actually become a student here?" "I'm saying you already are a student here, Maria. You've been learning in these halls for months. Now we just need to make it official." The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and conversations with people Maria had never imagined talking to. The dean of admissions spent an hour with her, asking about her musical background and her goals. A financial aid counselor explained scholarship opportunities and work-study programs. Professor Wellington helped her prepare a portfolio of pieces. To record for her application, the most meaningful change was the way other students began treating her. Instead of being invisible, she found herself included in conversations about music theory and performance techniques. Claire, who had apologized the night of the performance, actually became a kind of friend, often asking Maria's opinion about musical interpretation. "I've been thinking about what you said about playing with emotion instead of just technique," Claire mentioned one afternoon as they sat together in the campus cafe. "My private teacher always focused on getting every note perfect, but she never talked about what the music was supposed to feel like." "Professor Wellington taught me that the notes are just the beginning," Maria replied. "The real music happens when you connect a composer's feelings with your own experiences." "That's why your performance was so powerful," Claire said. "You weren't just playing Rachmaninoff's notes. You were sharing your story through his music." 3 months later, Maria stood backstage at Sanders Theater, preparing for the official student showcase that had started this entire journey. But now, instead of being an outsider trying to prove she belonged, she was an officially enrolled Harvard student with a full scholarship, preparing to perform as part of the university's musical community. She was wearing a beautiful black dress that Professor Wellington had helped her choose, and her hair was styled in a way that made her feel confident and professional. Most importantly, She was about to perform a piece she had chosen herself, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, for an audience that included her parents, sitting in the front row with proud smiles on their faces. 5 minutes, Maria, the stage manager whispered Dot as she waited in the wings. Maria thought about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been cleaning these same halls, dreaming about music but never imagining she could be part of this world. Now, she was about to perform on one of Harvard's most prestigious stages, not as an outsider proving herself, but as a student sharing her art with her community. But the moment that meant the most came after her performance, when she was greeting audience members in the lobby. A young girl, maybe 14 years old, approached her with shy eyes and spoke in Spanish. "Excuse me, are you Maria Santos? My mom works in the dining hall here and she heard about your story. I love music too, but I've never had lessons. Could I ask you something?" Maria knelt down to the girl's level. "Of course. What's your name?" "Isabella. I want to learn piano, but my family can't afford lessons." "Did you really teach yourself from YouTube?" Maria smiled, remembering her own journey from watching videos on a cracked phone to performing on Harvard's stage. "I did. And you know what? If you have passion and you're willing to work hard, you can learn anything." "Do you want me to show you some basic techniques?" Isabella's eyes lit up. "Really? You would do that?" "Of course. Music should belong to everyone, not just people who can afford expensive lessons." As Maria spent the next 20 minutes showing Isabella simple finger exercises and basic music theory, she realized that her story had come full circle. She had started as someone on the outside looking in, dreaming of belonging to the world of classical music. Now, she was using her position to help another young girl believe that her dreams were possible too. Professor Wellington watched from across the lobby, smiling as he saw Maria mentoring the younger student. This was what music education was really about, not just creating performers, but creating teachers and advocates who would open doors for the next generation. When Isabella's mother came to collect her daughter, she shook Maria's hand with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for showing her that people like us can dream big dreams too." As Maria finally headed home with her parents that night, Eduardo driving slowly through the campus they now all considered part of their world, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer just observing other people's opportunities from the edges, but the most important change wasn't her student status, or her scholarship, or even her musical development. The most important change was her understanding that talent and dreams aren't limited by background or circumstances. They just need someone brave enough to claim them and generous enough to share them with others. Tomorrow, she would start working with 3 other students like Isabella, young people from working families who loved music but had never had formal opportunities. Professor Wellington had helped her create an outreach program that would bring free music education to kids throughout the Boston area. Maria Santos had found her place in the world of classical music. Now she was making sure that world had room for everyone.